Howdy, and welcome to LeeReads, where I talk about the books I've been reading and enjoying lately. Today I'm doing a wrap-up of the books I read in July, which was a really good reading month for me. I finished 6 books. 3 were actually romance this time, 2 were science fiction, 1 was fantasy, and I did DNF 1 fantasy, which I'll talk about at the end. As usual, we're going to talk about the books in the order that I read them in. The first book I read last month was Second First Impressions by Sally Thorne, which is an adult romance. Sally Thorne's debut novel, The Hating Game, is very popular. It's an enemies to lovers kind of rival business office type romance that's hilarious. When I saw she had a new romance out, I snapped it up as soon as I could. This one was really heartwarming. The premise of the novel is that our main character is in her mid-20s and she is the manager for a retirement home that has recently been bought out by a new company. The son of the new owners is someone that everyone considers a little bit good for nothing. He's estranged from his family in a way. His dad shows up with the son one day. This is my son. He's gonna live in the empty duplex on the property and just find him a job, find him something to do. Thankfully, or maybe not so thankfully for our main character who lives in the other side of that duplex on the property, there are 2 sisters in the retirement community that need to hire an assistant, and they delight in tormenting their assistants. So the main character gets the owner's son set up in this position and hijinks ensue. It's really heartwarming. It's not as steamy of a romance as The Hating Game is. It's not truly enemies to lovers, but our main character has to overcome her negative first impressions of the property owner's son. In addition to being a cute, satisfying romance story, each character had their own journeys that they were going on that I thought were concluded very nicely. As a veterinarian, I loved that one of the features of the story is that there's an endangered tortoise that lives on the property and they get hit by cars or they get stepped on and their shells get damaged, and the main character, who always wanted to be a vet growing up, takes the time to do shell repair, and this was in one of the scenes and I just remember, yep, I did that on my exotics rotation. Definitely shell repairs and taking my little tortoise for a walk so it could get sunlight. So that was just an added dash of a reason that I enjoyed the story. The next novel I finished was an audiobook. It's The Prince of Dogs by Kate Elliott, which is the second novel in the Crown of Stars 7-book series, which lives up here on my shelf. Because it's the second novel in a series, it's hard to really summarize the story. After the events of the first novel, a besieged city was lost to the enemy. A very important person to the king is feared dead. The main characters in the story, Leith and Elaine, are dealing with those repercussions as everyone else, but each of them now is in a slightly different position power-wise than they were before. One thing that really gets me about this novel is a character that you really grow to loathe in the first book for one of the characters makes a reappearance in this book, and the very first time I read it, I actually gasped and had to put the book down. I was so sick to my stomach that this character reappeared to kind of shake things up. So finished book 2. Book 3 is also out on audiobook, and Kate Elliott recently announced that the series has done well enough in audio form that books 4 through 7 are going to be produced and start coming out next year. Yay for Crown of Stars making a little bit of a resurgence. The next book I read is another adult romance, and it is the advanced e-arc that I was lucky enough to receive from NetGalley for The Vanishing Days by Susanna Kearsley, which comes out this October. It's no secret, I love Susanna Kearsley, and I also rated this novel very highly. The story takes place in the historical setting in the mid-1700s and flashes back to the early 1700s. When I finished this novel, I laid in bed just thinking about it for a while, because things are not as they appear to be. So whenever you finish it, you immediately want to go back and start it again and try to kind of pick up on clues. This novel has more of an intrigue premise than some of her other ones, because the main character is this soldier who goes to visit his friend in Scotland. His friend isn't home, But his wife implores him, please, someone just asked my husband to do this job. He's out of town for now. Can you, on his behalf, do this job for him? Scotland tried to colonize part of South America. I think they landed in Panama, and it was called the Darien colonies, which failed because England and France blockaded their ability to send supplies down there, and then they also ended up fighting the Spanish at some point. So they had a failed colony, and then many of their sailors died in shipwrecks. And so the country has come into some money after its recent unification with England. The country is paying out small sums of money to family members of those who died in these skirmishes and these failed explorations. There is a woman claiming to be a widow of one of these sailors, and there is reason to doubt her word, and so our main character is set to investigate her claim and try to find proof either way of whether she's lying or telling the truth. And it soon becomes apparent that she's not quite telling the truth of her relationship with this man she's claiming was her husband, but the reasons are not what you think they are. And as our main character is kind of going through this investigation and getting to know her a little bit better, he's not only trying to figure out if she's telling the truth, but some of the wider implications and some of the people that are swept up in her story, and some of the intrigue. Some of the people that are swept up in her story are involved in some political intrigue that make things a little bit more complicated. This particular novel felt more like a historical fiction story and a little bit less like a romance, but it still had those aspects in it. So if you were maybe on the fence about Susanna Kearsley because you don't read a lot of romance, this one would be a really good one to pick up. The next book that I read was book 5 in the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey, and at this point I've caught up to the TV show. So now for the remainder of the books that I'm going to read, I don't know at all what's going to happen, and I'm really excited about it. One interesting thing that I learned this month actually was James S.A. Corey is a pen name for 2 authors that write the Expanse series under that name. I didn't know that. But I do plan on continuing my read of the series, basically reading 1 book per month, so that when the last book comes out, I won't be too far behind getting to find out how everything wraps up. The next book I read was another adult romance. This one is called Well Met by Jen DeLuca, and this one is really cute. It's a Renaissance Fair inspired romance. The main characters are volunteers for this Renaissance festival that this school in this small town puts on every year. The main character is just visiting for the summer to help take care of her sister, who is in a car wreck, and her young niece, who's in the high school. The niece really wants to do the Renaissance Festival, and an adult is required to sign up as well. So our main character, Emily, joins the Renaissance Festival. Weeks of practice and then weeks of actually doing it on the weekend. It's a little bit of an enemies to lovers romance because she initially really doesn't like the uptight director of the Renaissance Festival, whose name is Simon. However, when they're in character, Tavern Wench Emily actually gets a little swept off her feet and wooed by Simon's Renaissance character, a pirate. And so you have this interesting drama where in the public at the Renaissance Festival, for this storyline, they have to tolerate each other and be flirty, but in real life they don't really like each other so much until that changes. And it was very sweet. If you enjoy Renaissance festivals, I think you'll get a kick out of this one. It made me really miss Renaissance festivals, and who knows, hopefully I can go to one this year. And I always enjoyed dressing up as a pirate as well. The last book I read was an audiobook for She Who Became the Sun, which was released this month. This was my top novel of the month. This is a retelling of how a peasant, a nobody, became the emperor of the Ming Dynasty, by overcoming the Mongols who were ruling China at that time. First of all, the world building and the historical aspects were done very well. But secondly, the character work is what really makes this novel shine. The 2 primary characters are both, in a sense, obsessed with their fates. The main character grows up very poor, starving, believing that her fate is to be nothing, and that is what she's told. Her fate is nothing. By the time the story starts, she's the only girl left in her village because the famine is so bad that the other families in the village just stop feeding their daughters so that their sons can survive. And that holds true in her own family too. Her older brother, Chul, is favored by their father, and a seer tells Chul that his fate is greatness, but the girl's fate is nothing. The little girl doesn't want to be nothing. She's clawing to survive, to live, to do something with her life. And the boy Chul sort of throws it away. In the very first chapter, he dies, and the girl decides that maybe she can trick heaven. Maybe she can take her brother Chul's fate. Maybe she can be great. If she believes in her heart that she is Chul, maybe she can make the heavens believe it too, and she can live that fate. So from the first chapter, the little girl becomes Chul, her brother, and has to believe in her soul that she is Chul, and also behave how he would behave to the rest of the world so that she can live his fate. She winds up spending years growing up in a monastery, becoming educated, and then gets thrown out into the war with the Mongols that occurs. And all of the while, she is terrified that heaven and anyone will learn who she really is, and that Chul's fate for greatness will be ripped from her grasp, and she'll just wind up with the little girl's fate of nothing. Our other main character is a eunuch general in the Mongol army. This man was castrated as a very young boy because his father betrayed the great Khan, and the punishment for that is killing every male member of the family for like nine generations. But one of the sub-rulers takes pity on this boy and doesn't kill him, he just castrates him. And this boy grows up with that shame. However, this kind of sub-ruler's son takes him under his wing, and they become friends and grow up together, and then eventually this man becomes a general in the army. But he's struggling with his fate, and his fate is to avenge his family's death. So even though he's serving in the Mongol army and kind of biding his time for now, he knows he's determined to kill the man who castrated him and killed his family. And he feels as though he's a slave to that fate and that it's inevitable. And it's really interesting how kind of these two characters' firm beliefs in their fates, or the risk of losing it, or just being lost to the inevitability of it, guides their actions in this war, the Mongols versus the Red Turban rebels who were trying to overthrow the Mongol rulers. It's really, really good. I was listening to it, and I didn't want to stop listening to it. It's a pretty hefty book, and I read it in about two or 3 days because I just didn't want to put it down. I've been seeing a lot of praise for this book, and I think it is well deserved. You should definitely pick this book up if you're a fan of fantasy, because there's definitely a fantastical layer to it. But I don't want to spoil that. So that was my favorite book that I read this month, She Who Became the Sun. The book that I did not finish this month was actually an e-arc for a book that published this past week, The Hand of the Sun King. I enjoyed it at the beginning. I really liked the two opposing magic systems. So the main character is torn between two cultural heritages. His father's is the heritage of like the ruling people, and their ruler, the emperor, has magic, and the main character really wants to be taught that magic and become the hand of the Sun King, the hand of the emperor. But on the other side, his mother's people have a different type of magic, and they've been subjugated, and you can't practice that magic without risking being killed. And so there are stirrings of an uprising from that group of people. So even as this boy is studying to pass these exams to try to be placed well in the government, so he can become Hand of the Sun King, he's also being pulled a little bit by the culture and magic of his own people. So I really liked the world building. I liked the setup. I just didn't enjoy the main character, and maybe that was something the author was doing on purpose because he's a little bit arrogant. But yeah, I just didn't really like him. I didn't want to be in his head and continue reading about him, so I actually DNF'd the story at about 50%. But I may come back and finish it at a later time. Yeah, and that's it. That's what I read in July. Overall, a very positive reading month. A lot of happy stories that were very satisfying. If you like adult historical fantasy at all, or Chinese-inspired stories, you really need to read She Who Became the Sun. It was really good. My voice is going. It's time to wrap up this wrap-up. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Let me know what your favorite book of the month was, and if you're going to pick up any of the books that I talked about today, which I recommend all of them, except The Hand of the Sun King, but maybe try it. You might like it more than I did. And don't forget to support your local library. Thanks.